Agile Requirements Designer Automation Layers. This is a short demonstration on how to create automation layers or to use automation layers, and also how to mix automation layers from maybe different scripting languages together. So ARD is a modeling tool that can assist business analysts, programmers, testers, and automation specialists specify and test complex systems. ARD can generate automation scripts. And to do this, you initially start by creating code snippet libraries. So you chop up the language you're working in or the scripts you're working in into smaller components. And then you link the snippets to variables. So in effect, you go through and take some of those snippets and replace them with variables. You then can map those snippets to functional logic inside flows, and you can have multiple snippets to multiple flows and vice versa. You can then map the variables that you define in the snippets to powerful test data functions, including the ability to repeat if you need to have something occurring more than once. You can also generate multiple types of automation scripts based on optimized test case design, which is one of the core features of Agile Requirements Designer. And very importantly, you can regenerate automation scripts whenever the logic or the requirements change. Okay, so now let's take a look at the tool. Okay, so let's start with a basic script. Now, you can pretty much convert any script into an automation layer inside Agile Designer, but in this case what I'm going to do is actually going to use the data generation engine, and this is part of the CA/TDM product, and what this allows you to do is to generate data. Now, normally you would just generate directly into the system, but in this case we're actually going to click batch, and that's going to create us a set of scripts. Now, those scripts are what we're going to use to do our initial modeling, and this will actually do a publish, and the publish contains these three scripts: a command script, an XML, and a CSV, and the CSV actually contains the variables, and then we're going to allow us to adjust the variables. So we're going to use this to do some data generation as part of our ARD flow as well. So let's just go off, find those scripts, and there they are. And then we go into Agile Designer. Now I'm just going to start you off. So let's just do Swift publish, click finish, and what you'll do is go to File, Configuration, Automation. Now, it may well pick up an automation layer already at the top, but if it does, all you've got to do is just click on the little X, and that's going to create you a blank configuration for you to start working with. Now, by default, we create you one layer, which is called default, and the sort of most obvious things that you want to do with the UI. Now, this has got nothing to do with the UIs, so I'm just going to remove everything from there and start again. Now, let's go and have a little look at our first file that we want to deal with. So if we take a look at maybe the CSV, now if we just open that in an editor, let's try it in Notepad++, you'll see that we've got a little bit of script that we want to model. So if we go back into Agile Designer, and I'm going to go to the layer screen, I'm going to add a layer, and I'm just going to call this CSV. And that's pretty much all we need to do. We're going to lose the default. We don't need the default in this one, so we've just got CSV. So we've got that like so. So we've got CSV. And now we're going to come in and look at objects and actions. So CSV, again, it's put the defaults in, so I'm just going to remove those. Takes 2 seconds. And then I need to add an object, which is going to be CSV. And so what you have then is an object type, and then you need an action type. So what I'm going to do is just put in header, like so, and now we have a header. Now I need a code snippet in there. Now if we just pop back over to our Notepad++, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to just copy that, Control C, I'm going to pop it into here, and we've pasted in the first part. I'm just going to put a carriage return on the end there, like that. And what we're going to do then is we're just going to then add another action, which is going to be data. Okay, so let's click on data. Now, what we need to do with data, we need to get a little cleverer with data. So I'm actually going to take the whole lot in. So let's just do copy there and pop that into the snippet. Now, what you've got here is the base currency. Now, in this case, what I want to do is I want to parameterize that up. So you could come in and do insert a variable, and there's lots of different variables you can put in, but let's just pop in. What I'm going to do is actually steal the base currency from here, Control X, pop that in there, and then you just put a little tilde around it, and that is then a variable that we can then adjust when we want to put it out. These ones I don't care about, and let's look at the target currency as well. Let's just take that and let's pop it that over in like so. And for the trader ID, I'm going to again just steal that from there and just pop that in like so, and again put a tilde on it and lose the first line, put a carriage return, and now we have in effect got a header and a data. Now what I'm going to do at the moment is I'm just going to actually do a save as, and I'm just going to call this, so let's just pop that back there, and I'm just going to call it Swift batch. So that's the basics of how you'd start to set up a multi-layered configuration file containing multiple types of script files that are going to be created as you generate your test cases. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to show you the end article, in other words, one I created earlier, but I'll go through relatively slowly, and if you just take some time, maybe pausing and just having a look as we go along. So firstly, before I do that, let's just have a look in here. So say, for example, I wanted to take the sprint and make that a variable. I could just put a tilde around it like that, or you could come in and use insert variable reference, and that's going to put a variable 1 like so. Let's just go up there and change, get rid of sprint 1, and maybe for the 100 I could do the same thing and insert another variable. So you could do that, and that's variable number 2. So you could do it that way, but I just prefer to actually have the name of the actual variable in it, like so. So just hit close for the moment. Do you want to save the configuration? No, we don't for the moment. And let's go back to Swift 103. Now, Swift 103 is one I created earlier, and this is where I took those scripts that we looked at before, these 1, 2, 3, like so, and we chopped them up and we put them into a configuration file. So let's have a look. Now, if we go back in here, again, let's just start with CSV. CSV data and header. Data, number of foreign payments, target currency, trader ID. I've included number of foreign payments as something that I want to change. We've got, now in our layers, we've actually created 3. We've got a publish CSV, data gen, XML, a command script, and I've also created a little master script. And the reason for that is that we might create lots of publishes, and I'm too lazy to run them one at a time, so I want to create a master script which is going to run them all. So let's just keep with our CSV. So if we go to CSV, those are the layers, and then we start looking at variables. Now, what I've done, if you want to adjust the names of the files as they come out, in this case, what I really care about is the trader ID. I need to create a variable, and that variable can be controlled by the flow. So the first thing I needed to do was just add in a variable, and you click just add variable. You just add it in, and all I did was do exp trader ID, and that allows, that's a variable local to this layer in effect. And you just give it a default value and so forth, and this is all about controlling the name of the file you're going to create. When we come to automation, we are going to be creating lots and lots of automation scripts, and you need to make sure that the names don't overwrite each other. So when you click on the export, file naming system is variable. You could use path names or path numbers, nothing wrong with that. In this case, it's better to control it with the data that is actually inside the test case, because as each test case runs, it will pick up its own set of data. So here we have exp trader ID. I put a prefix of tr. Exp trader ID is going to be popped into this piece here, and it's going to be called CSV. Okay, so you've got your actions, your CSVs, your datas, your headers, exports, variables, and layers. Now let's go and maybe have a look at the data gen XML one and look at the actions there. Now this is pretty straightforward. All we really did here was come in and actually copy as is. We made a slight difference in that the output file name is required, the generator needs to know the name of the output file. So we actually popped in a variable called outfile.csv. In fact, you can see it's referring to the CSV that we created with the other automation. So we put tr in the front, tilde outfile, and as long as that outfile matches, we should be good. If we take a look at our variables, we should see probably exp trader ID is there as well. So that's going to allow us to, in effect, create a matching XML. Let's take a look at our command script. Again, our command script is pretty straightforward. Let's look at the actions. It's a script. And here I've actually just used variable name. I could have probably put trader ID in there instead, slightly different. But again, all I did was literally cut and paste it and just took out, which was a hard-coded value, which I think was DM333 dot something or other, and I've replaced it. And then the last one, which is a bit of a trick, is a little master script, which is basically a little piece of command script, which is going to in effect run those command scripts for us. Okay, so that's how we build up our automation configuration file, and the point about it is that you just kind of go through a couple of iterations, make sure it's right, and the proof of the pudding is when you actually start generating the scripts. Now here I've got a very straightforward little publish just to show you cross-currency and single currency. So now, importantly, what you need to think about with each one of these script generation flows is that it's most likely going to be used by another flow. So the way you need to think about how you communicate with it. So we've got here a properties tab, and if you go to parameters, I'm going to be passing in the base currency, the cross currency, the number of foreign payments, and the trader ID. So I'm going to actually be passing these into this master script, and it is then going to create me the appropriate Swift publish that I require. So now if we go to single currency, now let's just have a look at the logic here. So all possible paths, and let's just turn on test data. Test data in there. Now what you'll see is we've actually set the exp trader ID to trader ID. So we've gone in and actually done a little bit of work in our test data. So if we come into cross currency test data, we've got our variable exp trader ID, which we created earlier in the layers, and then all we're doing is passing in the trader ID, which comes from the parameter. So we're in effect sort of priming up our automation ready to go here. Now and then we go into our cross currency. Let's do single currency to start with. And if we go to single currency, you'll see the automation tab, and you can start seeing where the automation has now been layered on it. So the philosophy really is to start creating these as a component library of useful automation activities that you can then call from master flows. Now in this case, this is a sort of generalized test data generation scripting that we've created here, but as I said before, it could be anything you like. Now all we had to do, so let's just go and click say add. What we do first, command scripts. If I want to create a command script, we clicked add. So I go to my command scripts, let's just call it data gen script. Now it's got a repeater in there. Now the repeater allows you to, if you want to, you could create multiple versions of this automation, and that's quite useful if you want to say maybe create multiple XML nodes, etc. You could repeat them, and if you click on there, you'll go into our data painter functionality, which maybe you could issue some SQL, look up a number of accounts, and then repeat by the number of accounts. So if you have 5 accounts, you'd get 5 different repeated automation blocks, which is a pretty cool feature. So all I had to do there, and for my variable name, I just had to pick in this case, it's the trader ID, which has been primed for us before, and this, we call this use command. And let's just have a click on OK. And you'll see here we've got a use command script has now been added. The variable name has been set by exp trader ID. Now I can remove that if I want to. Just click remove. If you end up with multiple scripts where there's a sequence required on them, in this case it doesn't, because they're almost, actually these two you need the header before the trailer. You can actually move them up and down using the little green arrows there if you get them in the wrong order. So that's easy enough. So here we've got our master script coming out. We're going to publish a header, which is pretty much straight text. For our publish CSV, just click on edit, and you can see here we're just doing a repeater of 1. We're passing the base currency, the number of foreign payments, the base currency again, and sorry, that's wrong, that should actually be the target currency. Let's just change that to cross currency. Click on OK, and let's just look here, and that's just our data gen. This one again is pretty much straightforward, like so. Actually, that was wrong. Let's pop that back to here, because this is a single currency and I'm actually going to keep them the same. So that was correct the first time. So I should just leave that as base currency. Click on OK. And that's basically the logic that we want to come out of this. And let's just click on save. And for cross currency, we've pretty much done the same thing. Automation like so. Okay. So what we're doing is trying to parameterize up. Now this is a pretty straightforward flow. You could have more complex ones, and I'll show you how to do it with a request response pair in a moment. Now what we've also done is we've had our parameters created. I've created different path types. So I've created two path types here, same currency and different currency. So to do that, you just pop into the little two pieces of wood, like path types, and you just add in a couple of extra path types, same currency. Now the reason I want to do this is later on I'm going to drop this on the palette. In other words, I need to create some publishers as part of my automation, and the best way to do that is to actually separate them into different path types, because you can choose those as you drop them on the palette. So we've got two different path types. So here, let's go to same currency, and all I did was come down the road like that. If you click on the same currency, what you'll actually see is a little tab here, automation, and if you click on the refresh button, let's click on regenerate the script, you'll see it's actually it kind of gets very cleverly shows you what's going to happen when you run this. So it's kind of a preview function. So you can see here we're actually going to create 4 different scripts, and then maybe if we switch to our different currency, which is down the other way, and here we can see we've got those. Again, I can just do my refresh, and let's look at our published CSV. Again, we've got cross currencies, which is good. That's what we expect, and that's what we need. Now what you can do now is you can come in and just click on the automation export. So click on export. Now that's going to actually build the scripts for you. Now what you need to do is you need to tell it where to put the automation scripts. So let's just go over and we're going to pop them into this library automation. So that's telling us where we're going to put the folder. Now if I click on export now, that's actually going to create 1, 2, 3, 4 scripts. So let's just click on export. It's going to tell us the layers we're going to export. Click on OK, and you get scripts were exported successfully. Now what you'll also see is a little thing here which is save settings. Now I'm going to come to that later on, but basically you can run this in batch. You can actually just fire off Agile Requirements Designer in batch to generate the scripts on demand, which is great for things like where you need to populate, as release automation or something like that, to populate a Jenkins build engine, or maybe Docker with some automation scripts. You can also, if you want to here, just pop in and set the parameter value. So here we've got US dollars and euros. So if I come through here and change this to, let's just change it to GBPs and click on OK, then what will happen, click on save, and then you'll end up with a different bunch of scripts. So our CSVs will now have GBPs in them, like so. So that's your parameters, that's your save settings, which we'll get back to, and that has now exported those scripts, which are now sitting over here. And what I could do now is I can just pop off and let's just run that script. So I'm ready to go. Let's just do run all, and that's the script that I generated before, which is the 4F, and that's running my if exists. It's created my XML, and this is actually doing a little data maker or TDM, CA/TDM product generate, and that's worked well. So that's how we set up a very basic scripting language with multiple layers. And now what I'm going to do is move on to how you would create them for something like maybe RR pairs, or for something like a SOAP message using a product like CA Service Virtualization. Okay, so let's start having a look at how you build request response pairs. So let's just go and have a look at request response pairs as consumed by CASV, Service Virtualization. Now typically you have a request and a response. So let's just take a look at a request. And in this case what we're interested in is we're going to do a credit rating, which has come from a WSDL, this is a SOAP request, and we have a trader ID, and let's take a look at a response. And a response is made up of a block of data, some markets, and then some credit history, like so. Okay, so our job now is to create a sort of more malleable version of a request response pair where we can adjust the data and obviously marry it up with the request. So you can link that then to the appropriate test cases. So let's just actually open up the request in an editor. Let's just do that, Notepad++, and let's just do the same thing with the response. And oops, just open that in Notepad++ as well. There we go. And you can see, it's a pretty standard structure. You can see this area here might repeat, and in fact it does, as does that, like so. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm just going to open up from the repository. Let's go and find. So we've got trader credit risk, and as before, I've actually kind of done this work before. Now, you'll see we've got a trader header, we've got a credit rating, and you've got in Agile Requirements Designer terms a loop here, because you could have multiple repeating bodies and you could have multiple repeating credit histories, and we've got a footer. So what we've done is actually kind of modeled out how we would like the the responder to look, and then we go in and we start looking at our configuration options, and we look at our automation, and you'll see the easiest way to do it is to think about a request and a response. So now typically what you would probably think about is a header to start with, a footer which is going to come at the bottom, which hopefully you'll see kind of matches with the modeling that we've done, and then right smack in the middle we've got the trader. So that's really what we've done, and you can see here that we've got the trader ID, which we've turned into a parameter or a variable. So when we're going to drop that on the palette, we can then plug in the trader ID as we care about it. And then we're going to go into the response, and we've done a very similar type of concept here. We've got a header which looks like so. So how do we create the header? As you would expect, we just kind of pretty much went like so, and just did a copy, and we copied that data, and then we popped it into Agile Designer when we build our layer, which we talked about before. So you've got our footer and a header, and then we've got the body, which is pretty much the core information about this request response, which is here. You can see credit rating, max amount, and all I've really done, I don't care about the last event, I've literally gone through and just created these as parameters, and done the same thing with history, like so. We've just actually created a little block there, and then we've gone to our markets, and we've done a similar thing here with our markets and our market names. So you can see it's pretty straightforward to kind of cut and paste, to do sort of chop it all up, pick out the bits you care about. You only really care about the variables you're going to be actually putting into, that you need to change. The rest you might want to just leave as pretty much static. Now let's go in and do a little bit of modeling. Now what we've also done here, just checking first of all, is to have a look at the concept of parameters, because again this is something that is going to be called as part of another flow. So you could create your request response pairs just kind of using this, but once you moved into proper use of Agile Requirements Designer, where you're building a logical model, then as part of the logical model you're going to create test cases, and those test cases are going to require specific request response pairs. So if you go to parameters, you can see here we've got the base currency, the credit rating, event currency, and the override trader ID. Now you can see that we're starting to marry that up with what we did with the Swift statements, because the trader ID is something that we care about. So we've got these 1, 2, 3, 4, which is all great, and then we're going to look at the trader header, and you'll see we've got some automation, and here we've got pretty much the response and the request. There's nothing going on with variables, because this is just going to come straight out of the automation layer. And then if we go back to the footer, as you would expect, we've kind of topped and tailed it, and there's our request and response footer, like so. Then you're going to get into trader ID. Let's just have a look at what we've done there. We've got some test data. Now the override trader ID has actually come in directly from the parameter block, and then in automation we've actually then created the variable override trader ID, which is now going to be passed in to the trader ID that we have in our automation layer. So we have that, so that's going to transfer in like so, and then you can kind of move down into our credit rating, which is the top block, and sure enough, there we have. Now in this one we're getting into something a little more funky. So if we look at this block, again it's to do with the responder. We look at edit. You'll see here we've got a repeater of 1. We only want one block at the top. We're passing the credit rating in. We have some fixed values. Now for the trader prior credit rating, what we've done here is we've used our data painter function, and we're starting to get into some more sophisticated data. And all we did is we just literally picked the random list of values, seedless Moody rating, and that's now going to resolve out to be AA3, which is one of the Moody's ratings. So that's sort of bringing in a degree of randomness to every time we create a request response pair, we're going to randomly pick a prior Moody's rating, which is interesting. So that's that one. And now let's start thinking about trader markets, and then we get into trader markets bodies. And now let's look at the bodies. And again, let's look at the automation. Again, we have a repeater here, and let's just edit that. We only want one, so we only want one market associated with this, and we've got a market name of NASDAQ. And then again, for the market currency, we're going to pick out resolvable value. In this case, we're just using currency codes. So we're going to pick out a random currency code for our, in this case, this is the trader markets. And then we get into the credit history block, and let's look at the automation here, and let's look at what we've done here. Now in this case, we've actually got pretty funky. So what we're going to do for this case is we've actually, for the repeater, edit resolvable value in Data Painter. So I'm not going to go about talk about Data Painter, but basically what we're doing is we're going to say select count star from events, where event date time, where we're picking out a currency. So in effect, what we're doing is we're finding an event that exists in a database, and we're going to count how many there are. Okay, so we're going to actually link specific events associated with that currency. So in this case, we're trying to repeat this as many times. So if we put in Swiss francs, we would look for an event with Swiss francs, count out how many there are, and in this case, we're just going to find the last event with Swiss francs. And that's going to resolve to a value. And then we're going to come down, and for our event and our event amounts, we're going to actually map them through using a SQL list function. So if you think about what we're doing here, we're actually using a little bit of database activity to go and expand or contract the market history. Is this market history? It is, sorry, credit history. So we're based on the credit history, we're going to increase or decrease the number of events, and we're going to carry information from databases into the actual response. So you could do this for a specific something like an account ID. So we're going to create a request response based on data that exists for that account ID. Or in this case, what we're doing is we just want to make sure the request response matches with real events. Because the point about this is that for a data journey, it might not just be you're just part of the data journey here. You're trying to respond to the application and give it events which are going to be real so the application can continue forward. Okay, so we've got into some slightly more advanced work in our request responders here. And again, like I did with the Swift, what you'll see here is we've created a couple of different path types, a basic credit rating and then a market history. So if we look at the market history one, you can see here, actually we've got a little bit of a loop going on. We've got a market body and a credit history. And again, what we might want to do is just pop in and have a look at the automation layers. We've got our request, and if we click on refresh, so we've got a trader ID of 1, which is our default, and then we've got a responder. And you can see our events, that event ID and that event amount have actually come through for some real data. So every time we do this, based on the currency code, and again, if we go off to our parameters, when we, I'll show you a little later on, if we just go off now and actually just create our market history and go and do some automation scripting. So we've got our request and response. Our request is number 1. Our responder is, so we're looking at events for, I guess, US dollars here, with event currency matching with the events that we care about. And you could also then go in and actually, so we got US dollars and euros, and sure enough, we got US dollars and euros. And if you adjust these and do a refresh, what will happen then is it will go off and do the database lookups to actually change your request and responders. So that's that, and let's just do, again, you could do save settings, but I'll do that in a little bit. And then you click off export, and that's going to send off our request and response, and they were exported successfully. And now if we just pop back in to our automation, you'll see here that we've actually created a responder with shredder ID 1 and request 1, and you can see that's the response as we saw in the preview, and that's the request with. Now you'll see that the trader ID 1 matches with the ID of the file that we're going to pop into CASV, and that's actually to do with how we've defined our automation layer. So if we go to File Configuration, Automation, you'll see here that we've got variables, we've got Auto Trader ID. Now we care about that for our export, and you'll see here we're using Auto Trader ID, which is a funny name for the file name, file prefix, Auto Trader ID, yeah, that makes sense, and then CATDM shredder, which is basically the shredder ID that we're creating, response, and that ID will get dropped in there like so. And similarly, if we switch to our request, you'd see a -req.xml. So that's how we're going to actually create our request responders. Now what we're going to do is tie this up into a master flow, which is actually then going to call, it's going to get a little bit clever, it's going to call the ability to generate some data, which is using this one, and then also create some matching request response pairs at the same time. Okay, so that's a couple of automation layers. Now, the reality is you'd probably want to call these from a kind of master flow. So you want to kind of now link them back to how you'd use them in the testing world. So let's just go and look at a little requirement, which is called fraud events. Now, fraud events, in effect, is a small bit of logic to actually test whether something is applicable to be tested for fraud. So this is a requirement, and you can see, depending on cross-currency, not cross-currency, event history available, etc., etc., low or high credit ratings, you're either going to go to a pass to fraud engine or log request and proceed. Now, if we go off and have a look, there are 12 possible. So in this case, we're going to go with exhaustive testing. That's fine, 12 is a perfectly reasonable number. Now, what we've also done is we've gone off and created a configuration, or picked up one of our standard configurations, which is for Cucumber. Now, Cucumber is a sort of given when then concept. Now, normally you would be using something like QTP, or UFT as it's known, or Ranorex, or Selenium, or AngularJS, or Eggplant, or Zaptest, or something like that. But in this case, we've just used the example of Cucumber. And if you go and look at your automation scripts, you'll see here we've got a bunch of automation scripts, and you'll see interleaved with them, we're actually creating the trader ID. So we're actually pulling those in from a sequence number, or it could be looking in from a backend database again, and we're setting the currency codes. Now, for this script, just worth noting that actually what we've got here is that we've then gone and got let's look at the parameters. We've actually set up a parameter here so we can adjust the base currency. The default is US dollars. Now, later on, what we're going to do is we're going to adjust that, and I'm going to show you how to do the batch generation of different scripts to create this in batch without having to go into the Agile Requirements Designer UI. So this is all of our logic, but actually now we want to say, well, for this, we now need some request responders. We need to generate some Swift messages with the appropriate trader IDs. So you go to your subflow decisions, drop on the palette, go to the repository, and you can see that we created a request responder for the trader credit risk. So we click on that. First thing it's going to do is pick the latest version, which is fine, 1001, and then it's going to look at the test cases or paths that we've created. Now, there's a couple in this case, market and history. In this case, we do want a market and history, so we click on OK. Now, what you need to do is you need to drop that piece of automation activity onto that test case like so. Or to that link. Now, what we're going to do is, in effect, any time we're going to be passing through our automation, you're just in effect going to make a reference to a subflow decision, which is a library of other automation activities that you can use. Now, to think about it, what you need to do is to kind of build up the library of standard request response pairs, any kind of standard activity that you could then use as part of a master flow. Now, just as before, I've actually created one I created earlier, and if you open this up, you'll see that I've just changed the shape on them by just literally dragging it out slightly so you can see. So these blue ones are actually request responders for generating a Swift request response pair, Swift publish to database, in this case, to create a Swift message. And you can see we've got 3 different kinds of credit ratings that we are credit rating request responses. Now, what you'll see if you click on that, there is an extra tab called subflow parameters, and here what we're doing is we're passing in the credit rating, the cross currency, and the trader ID. So all of those are going to be passed down into our subflow, which is going to react to those parameters. So just as the logic changed, where the ratings changed and the currencies changed, the subflows are going to react in the same way. Now if we go off and look at our test cases here, now we've got a bunch of test cases, and you can see that we're kind of making reference to our automation activities like so. And if we then just go off and go to automation, now what you'll see at this stage is that we have a cucumber. Now there's our cucumbers, we've got our trader IDs, we've got our currencies like so. But then if you look here, if we look for a request, you'll see 177746. We've got 177746. So we've actually created the appropriate matching request. And then if you look at the response, you'll see here that we've actually got the appropriate, so ATS, so that's cross-currency trade. So there are request and responders are now matching. And then you can see these are just some Swift scripts. The key one here is the CSVs, and the CSV then actually has the appropriate currencies, etc., filled in, like so. Now, again, we're going to put it to the automation layer, just to make sure that's all clear down. It is. And then if we click on export, you'll see it's mapping all the various different types of automation scripting that we can create. Now, some of the paths did not require automation, so you'll get script was empty, which is perfectly fine, because we don't actually care about those particular trader IDs. Because in effect they're not required when we don't need them as we go down those particular paths or journeys or test cases or user stories. So click on OK, and then if you pop over back to our automation layer, you'll see we've created pretty much everything. So those are our test cases, the ones that we actually care about. These are the appropriate request responses, which we would pop now into SV, and then here these command scripts are actually going to be the things that are going to create the Swift messages. So to summarize it up, we've actually been able to create request response pairs, we've managed to be able to create the appropriate Swift messages, and we managed to interleave 3 different types of scripting or automation scripting from one master script. Now the reality is that actually you don't want to be continually going back into the UI of Agile Requirements Designer to build these various scripts. All you really wanted to be able to do is to just pop in, change your parameters, and then create the scripts you need, especially if you're moving to a DevOps or continuous delivery model. So now an important thing here is to actually just notice this save settings. So I'm just going to click cancel, just going to click save settings. This is going to pop up, and we're just going to pop it into RRSV, which is one below automation, and click select folder. And what that's going to do for us, if we just pop back here, you'll see is that we've created a kind of master strip. Let's just do date modified, and you should see here config.xml, params, and run batch. So let's just have a look at that one. So we just go into Notepad++. That's just basically some internal stuff, so you don't need to worry about that. That's just in effect telling you what we're going to do. If we then go off to the run batch, again, we just need to open that in Notepad++. That is in effect just calling Agile Designer, batch mode, telling it the config.xml and the params.csv. So this is the bit you're probably going to mess about with when you're thinking about more of a changing our parameters to create the scripts that we need to be. That might be a customer ID or a trader ID or an account ID. In this case, we're going to use the base currency. And then if we go back over here, you'll see the params.csv itself, and that very basic in this case. It's just going to have the basic palm currency, palm-based currency, which is US dollars. So all you really need to do now is let's just go to our automation, and we'll just clear this down, and then you'd pop off into, and then you just do run_batch. Now that's in effect creating the script for us in batch mode, and that's created the scripts, and we're done. And here's all the various scripts that we talked about with our various cucumber scripts like so. Now what we could do now is we could think about maybe changing the automation scripts. Let's go back to here and change our params. So in this case we're going to go and change params to, in this case let's just change the base currency to euros like so. Click on save. And now what we could do is we could now run batch again, and in effect what that's going to do is it's going to create a whole new set of trader IDs, Swift messages, and command scripts and Cucumber scripts, as well as the ability to create the data, in which case with some Swift messages. So in other words, you can use this now to populate up multiple versions of automation scripts by using a batch command. So in other words, you can introduce this into your continuous development or your DevOps framework.